Hi, my name is Scott Lewis. I'm a partner with the Encrum Group and a co-founder and advisory board member of Atixa and Nabita. And I'm here today with
Michael Henry. I'm the lead investigator with the Encrum Group.
And the topic for this session is questioning. Now, very intentionally, we talked about questioning skills. This is essentially a whole day condensed into about 20 minutes or so. So we're going to hit some of the very high points. And I want to make sure I note that in questioning the parties, the reporting party and the responding party, there are a lot more things that are involved that we're not going to be able to get into today. Trauma-informed interviewing on both sides, the notion of investment, the breaching of information. That's not what this one's about. This one's really about all parties and all witnesses. And so we want to hit some of the critical high points so that you're able to engage in interviews and pay attention to these very, very important general tips. So you want to start us off, Mike?
Absolutely. So really, you want to kind of set the stage first. So, some of the art of questioning, gets into the minutia of how you ask questions, the tone, setting the stage, broad to specific. But really, you want to start with setting the scene. Like, this is your interview to control. You own this process. So how do we do that? How do we ensure that we've put ourselves in the best possible position to get the best possible, highest reliable information out of someone that we're interviewing? And the first way to do that is to set your scene, right? Make sure that you control your setting. You want to conduct interviews in person if at all possible. If that's absolutely not possible, try to use technology. We live in a great time right now. We have Skype. We have the ability to do things virtually so that we get at least the closest that we can get to an in-person interview. You want to arrange it in a setting that's quiet, secluded, private, and presents the lowest likelihood of some type of interruption or a distraction. That includes stuff that's in maybe your office. You conduct things in your office. We oftentimes are dealing with complex, sensitive type issues, and even the things that we set up in our office may serve as distractors.
Yeah, I call it staging the event.
Absolutely.
Like everything, and sometimes people are critical. They're like, oh, it sounds like you're faking it. A little bit, because I want to control that environment. And you're right, pictures that are on the wall. Like, what do you have on your wall? What does it demonstrate about you? Right. Even little things like the books on your bookshelf. What do they say? Do they say that you have a certain leaning or bias towards something? Because the people you're interviewing are paying attention.
Absolutely.
They're looking at your awards. They're looking at your pictures. They're looking at the books. They're looking at that placard on the wall that said you are a safe space or you're an ally. It's one of those things. So I think you're spot on. Like, all those things happen. Then when you get them in, and whether it's electronically or in person, again, I agree with you, in person 1,000 times better.
Always.
You need to set the tone. And I want you to thank them for coming. I think, looking somebody and saying, thank you for being here, even if there's this sort of tacit acknowledgement that you really didn't have much choice.
Right.
But what I like to remind people is, you did. You could have quit school. You could have quit your job. You could have stonewalled me for 3 weeks and pretended you never got the emails.
Right.
You could have made this much more difficult. And even if you did make it difficult, you're here now. So let's set the tone that I'm happy you're here. I know you probably don't want to be here. And that's true for everyone. Witnesses don't want to be here. The parties darn sure don't want to be here. And so let's make absolutely sure you understand that you're genuinely appreciative. In one of these other series, Brian and I talked about the notion of a good way to build that rapport is genuineness. Absolutely. And when if they have to really believe, and you should really mean it, thanks for being here, recognize this is hard, acknowledge that this is not something they wanted to do, that this is a difficult thing to do, to talk about yourself, to talk about your friends, to talk about intimacy with somebody you just met 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And then spend not an inordinate, but a fair amount of time getting them through the process. Like, here's my role. This is what I do. This is what is important to us in our process. Here are things I can do. Here are things I can't do. Give them timelines that let them put them at ease. I find, and I don't know if you have the same experience, but I find often the unknown is what is in the way of that rapport. And so if they can really grasp, hey, I'm here. I'm not here to prosecute. I'm not here to defend. I'm here to gather. And the more we work together on that, the better off we're going to be. And that is that rapport building stuff that I think really pays off long term.
One of the things I think, especially novice investigators, maybe get off the rails on is trying so hard to establish that rapport. I think most people understand that when you're doing a one-on-one interview, how the willingness of someone to give you private information, sensitive information, to talk to you openly and candidly about stuff that they won't even talk to their parents, trusted friends about, much less you're asking them all these probing questions. People understand that you got to establish a rapport. You got to be genuine. They got to trust you. But how do you do that? Like, I think novice investigators tend to equate that with small talk. I got to talk. Right. I got to do small talk. I got to get in their head, let them know that I'm a human being too. Which thought there?
Yeah, I don't agree. I think the problem is too, we teach that in the student affairs, student conduct arena.
Right.
We teach that to those hall directors that are doing, minor impossessions, right? You had a big party and you made too much noise. So we're like, tell me about, why you chose our school to come here and what's your goals in life. You do that in a sexual misconduct investigation where termination or suspension or expulsion, it feels fake because it is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm doing this. So I remember I told the story one time about this guy. I was trying to train him, and I gave him a checklist, and one of them said, build rapport. And he actually said to the other person, this is the part where I build rapport with you. And I was like, if it was a self-deprecating joke, you scored, right? But,
right.
But I don't think that's what you were going for. Right. So letting them know what's going on is that rapport building. I just genuinely have felt it. And the more they understand, I find they're more at ease. You do have to review confidentiality. You do have to review immunity and amnesty policies. You do need to talk about with retaliation, what's that, if they're being retaliated against, or things they might do that engage in accidental retaliation is what I call it. And then just remind them, the more truthful you are, the more accurate you are in your information, the better off we're going to be. So don't feel the need to embellish. Don't feel the need to withhold. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to shock me.
Right. I think so much of that has to do with setting the scene, and some of that's physical, right? Some of that's content based. Like, we may be talking about some stuff that's uncomfortable for everyone inherently. This is stuff that you have trouble saying to yourself in the mirror, much less to someone you just met. And so much of that can be mitigated by addressing it head on, preemptively. Like, let's call it what it is, understand what I do, how I do it, what this looks like, and the types of stuff we may be talking about. You lay that on the table and let them know we may be using terms that you don't use in public, right? That we don't use in traditional discourse. Let them know that up front. That way, when we get to the meaty stuff, the stuff that's inherently difficult to talk about, we've already laid it out there. And despite the fact that seems counterintuitive, that's a really critical aspect of building rapport.
100%. And Brian and I, in one of the other videos, talk a little about credibility assessments, and we got into sort of why people might be dishonest. But when they are, what do you do?
Well, some of that is based on, let's call something dishonest, let's call something counter to other evidence, right? I think novice investigators are always looking for that smoking gun, right? That gotcha moment.
Yeah.
It's so rare, it's the anomaly. And instead of looking for that gotcha moment, a good investigator will kind of be actively considering the evidence that we have, the other information that prior witnesses may have shared, and comparing and contrasting that with new information that they're getting, new statements that are coming from their current interviewee. So let's differentiate what you've said doesn't jive with other information I have from you said you weren't there. I happen to have watched a video surveillance tape where you walked through the door.
Yeah. And different investigators, I think, approach this different ways. There's the active lie and there's the lie by omission, right? There's stuff they're not telling you, and why they're doing it sometimes is as important as the fact they're doing it. But I appreciate the way you're putting it, because one of the bullets on one of the slides you all are going to see says, explain to them the repercussions of lying, which sounds really harsh. Like, do you know that if you lie, you will be in trouble and fired? Like, I don't think you should do that. I think what you want to do is say, I'm having trouble reconciling. And one of the other tactics that you could use is preemptively strike the need to lie. If I have that video already and I know they were at the party, start with, I know you were there. People have told me, I've got a video of you leaving. So I know you were there, and that's what I want to talk to you about, is what happened while you were there.
Right.
So let's start with that. And it lets them know sometimes that they're just, okay, you know more than I think you do.
Right.
So being a liar is not going to be helpful to me.
And it goes back to rapport building, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're going to catch on to the fact that, ooh, you could have caught me there, but you didn't. Like, you're not here to get me. You're not looking for a gotcha moment.
Yeah, putting it right on the table for them. What do you do if they just won't let it go? If they're just going to consistently lie directly, and or like, or by omission. Just I'm going to make you drag everything out of me.
Right. I think you start by kind of, you can go the route of let me talk about the ramifications of lying, but I don't know that's always the most effective approach. I think you walk them back to, and maybe you go point by point, like here are the things that I know. And what you're slowly doing is laying the foundation for the obvious contradiction, right? Like you don't have to say, ha, you're lying and here's why. That helps no one, right? And instead, any rapport that you've spent a good amount of time building, you've immediately destroyed. Instead, you just slowly lay out, what one of the things that I've heard or one of the things that I know is this. And, what you've just told me, I'm having trouble reconciling those two things together.
Right.
Help me understand that. I've taken, instead of the accusatory route, the gotcha moment, I've taken a seemingly empathetic approach. Like, I'm just trying my absolute hardest here to understand all the evidence. And what you just told me doesn't really jive. Help me with that.
Yeah, and an old law enforcement interview trick is, and I call it a trick, sort of tongue-in-cheek, because it's not really a trick as much as a play into human psychology. Sometimes people that do bad things do them in a well-meaning fashion. True. They meant well, and then they're hesitant to talk about it because they think, I meant for that to be good, but it turned out bad, so now I don't want to talk about it. And that happens. That's the inoculating, right? I'm going to give you a reason why I understand why you might want to lie, but I'm also going to tell you why you shouldn't in the same breath, right? But it's never helpful because then we end up finding out and it can hurt your credibility and determination later on. Right. And so you end up having this really good rapport moment between the two of them, or the two of you, that I think is so critical. And I don't think there's that big of a shift between the lying witness or the resistant or hesitant witness in the terms of trying to explain that you understand why they might be lying, why they might be resistant, why they might be hesitant to answer the questions. And like I said, it started at the very beginning. People don't like to talk to other people about the sex that they did want to have and that they enjoyed, much less this. And they damn sure don't want to talk about with a stranger. And so why not put that on the table? A lot of people will be really hesitant to even have this conversation at all. And I'm about to tell you that we're going to talk about it in a great deal of detail, but I don't want that to make you feel like you can't share with me. Right. Sometimes they're worried about where this information is going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the other resistant or lie, either way. I'm not going to share this with everybody. Or if you are, and this is a critical point, don't lie about it. If Michael comes in and he says, hey, is Sally going to find out that I was in here talking to you? The answer out of the gate is maybe, or it probably.
Yep.
And if it's yes, then the answer is yes.
Right.
And I understand you have a relationship with Sally you don't want to damage. And so that might be a reason for you to not share with me. So one of the ways to do that is to go, let me say it this way. This is the best part about interviewing witnesses. By the time I've gotten to a witness, I've already talked to the parties.
It's true.
I got a fair amount of data. And so, Mike's worried about his friend Sally and his other friend Ken, and he's friends with both of them, and he's in the middle of this mess. Hey, Mike, I know you have good relationships with both of them, and you don't want to damage it. What you're doing here really is corroborating. I sense you're like, I'm not sure that I want to talk to you. You're really telling me stuff I already know. And so here's a few things I know, and you give them enough to know, like you said earlier, he does know a lot.
Right.
Okay, so I know you guys had a text conversation the next morning. I know it's centered around what happened the night before. I know from at least one person who's seen those texts what their perception of them was. What's yours? See, that's an innocent, you've got all this data. Okay. And I didn't ask him what the conversation was. His perception of the conversation. Like, that's a different question. We'll get into the details later. So gauge that hesitation, why it exists, get a sense of what's going on. We could do a whole nother half hour on what if it is that you're afraid of retaliation or afraid of the parties. It's a whole nother thing and requires a different response on how we can protect you, what we might do, how we might be able to keep you confidential or not confidential. All of those things are there.
And let me caveat that with, I think sometimes investigators worry about giving too much information. Part of watching way too much CSI or Law and Order is asking very pointed questions. And when someone gets themselves into kind of a logical loop or something that doesn't make sense, it's that gotcha moment.
Yeah.
And as investigators, that's what we're going for. And it shouldn't be, right? But what I want to caveat is that what information you share, the amount or detail of information you share, is a highly strategic decision, right? So it's going to be based on I already talked to the parties. If we're talking with witnesses, there's a lot of information I already know. Some of it, I maybe have an idea already that you may not want to talk about this, or maybe that you have an intrinsic loyalty to one party or the other, and that you have a willingness to paint a particular incident in one way or the other. If I know all that going in, then what I'm willing to share to you is going to be strategic. Some things is going to get you talking, and that's ultimately the goal, right? I want information.
Absolutely. The goal of these things are what one of my instructors way back in the day used to say, the goal is the living room conversation.
Right.
You want to get to that point where it's just two people sitting here having a conversation. Mm-hmm. They don't even remember the tape recorder's there anymore.
Absolutely.
They don't know that they'll stop noticing the note taker. I sometimes refer to this as sort of the Amazing Race theory. Mm-hmm. So the show Amazing Race that was on for a number of years, these people would race around the country, and there are these cameras right in the car with them. And I had a friend who was on the show, and when I was asking her, I was like, what was that like? She said, it's really weird. It's like day 3, you forget the cameraman is there, even though he's sitting in the cab with you.
Right.
I want them to forget that recorder. I want them to forget that note taker. And why is that? Because you're so comfortable with the person you're racing with, you don't think about it. All you're thinking about is what we're doing in this moment. And that's what you're shooting for. That comfortable, here we are, we're just chatting. I struggle sometimes with if you move toward interrogation or cross-examination. Because I think if you're going to be so resistant or so dishonest that I go, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and breach and tell you a lot of stuff I know, and now I'm going to start asking some very pointed questions. I think it's hard to go back.
I would argue it's darn near impossible to go back.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to be friends anymore after this, right? That's how that's going to end. And I really struggle with that when I see people go too early into that breach. It's like, oh, well, you're lying. Well, watch this. And that's, what's that old saying? You get more with honey than you do with vinegar.
It's true.
Start sweetening them up. Start relating. That empathy piece is so critical. I think everybody has a little bit of resistance coming in. And so investigators who go in thinking it's going to automatically be this like group hug moment are going in with rose-colored glasses.
Right.
It takes a while to get there. The other thing I would say about the rapport building piece is recognize that some people develop rapport faster with other people and some people don't. And that can change from person to person. You and I could go into a room and be talking to a party and I'm like, this guy's totally relating to me. And you're sitting behind me going, not remotely.
Right, true.
And so if Mike's like, I think I can relate to this guy, we may tag off each other. And then once I realize, oh, this guy's relating to Mike better, I'm gonna back off a little bit and let it go. And sometimes investigators, we have to check our egos and not go, we're the best one in the room and I'm the only one. I am lead investigator, so I must lead.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you got to give it off to the other person and let them run with it. And that is being intentional. And I think this is kind of some of our wrap-up questions here. Like what are some other points if we had 2 minutes, because that's about what we have.
Right.
So sort of reps. Be intentional about who does the interviews. If you are lucky enough to have a choice of investigators, a pool of people you can pick from, not just who's going to be lead and who's not going in, and maybe that may change. Who is the person who will investigate? Do they have any shared experience? You think about gender and gender splitting.
Absolutely.
You think about age, race, ethnicity, backgrounds. Like, is there something that might help that commonality to help develop that rapport? And I'm not saying you're going to have the luxury of that all the time, and you may just get who you get. My first job doing this stuff, I was the only investigator. So one of my running joke was they could have any investigator they wanted as long as it was me. Like that was it. I was the only one. But once we had more, we were very, very thoughtful and intentional about who's going to do this. Let's think about all the variables involved. What else would you say?
Yeah, I mean, some of it has to do with scheduling, right? Like we all have busy schedules. It's tough to schedule interviews. It's tough to even get in contact with parties sometimes, much less get them in the door, scheduling it in between meetings and all the other things you got going on.
And their lawyer and their advisor
Absolutely.
And their victim's advocate. Right. Yeah.
So once you get them in the door, we go back to what we said, 20 minutes ago, like, we're just glad you're here. Like at some point, we're just thrilled that you've actually shown up. But there's still some other aspects of intentionality that you still have control over, like when you schedule, how much time you schedule. Don't schedule a reporting party interview for 45 minutes. It's probably not going to work. And what you'll end up doing is that if you don't allow sufficient time, right when the stuff is getting good, right when you've established that rapport, right when we talk about a dripping faucet in a flowing fire hose type thing, in terms of like the flow of information, you might get right where the lever's been turned. And we're out of time, like a game show. That it's all about intentionality, and those are factors that you have control over.
Yeah, the interviews take, this is a common question we get in investigator training, how long do these take? They take as long as they take. Right. Bank out a fair amount of time, have set up with your staff or with any assistance you may have. Don't knock. If there's this signal, this is going to go. If there's another person I'm supposed to meet with, call them and say, I'm not coming because the lever's just been switched and I'm going to stay till it ends. And that may include taking short breaks, pay attention to their emotional state. One thing I like to remind people is if I feel like I'm interviewing Mike and I feel like he's getting really emotional, recognize that with some people, if you go, why don't we take a break? They're going to say something like, no, I'm fine. Because they don't want to be seen as you're having to break for their lack of emotional control. True. Put it on yourself. Nobody's ever going to tell you can't go to the bathroom. True. So you're perfectly like, no, I'm sorry. This is for me. Like I need to step out and use the restroom real quick, and then I'm going to come right back. So it gets them off it, and then off that thought process, and then you're leaving them in there with the tissues and the water and have those things that are very, very important.
And maybe with their advisor too, right? And I think, we always talk about, you have the option to step out and confer with your advisor privately if you want to. Like I
absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think allowing that opportunity is something it's something that you can do intentionally.
And builds rapport.
Sure does.
It shows that you're not out to get them. Yep. One last thing I'll say, and then I'll ask Mike for any closing thoughts. Don't take any of this personally. If you're interviewing the person and they're just lying and it's not coming around or they're making you pull stuff out, don't get angry. If you start having an emotive reaction to their unwillingness to share information with you, you're too invested. You're supposed to be an impartial person who gathers evidence. Once you start getting mad at somebody, you're not impartial anymore. And so stay true to they're lying. It's not me they're lying to as much as it's the situation they're lying to. It's not you. You're just you're the manifestation of this awfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else do you want to close with?
I guess the final thought would be, and I don't think it's something that we spent enough time on because we've got 20 minutes, right? I mean, we do these types of trainings in 2-day formats because there's a lot to it. But the other thing that I would say is just in terms of the types of questions that you ask, a good default rule is to start open. Give them the floor. And that can be from the very beginning. Like, we're here to talk about this particular situation that happened on this date. Here's the basic information I know about it. Why don't you walk me through your night? That's open, man. Like, start where you want to. Yeah. You want to start at 6 p.m.? You want to start at 9? You want to stop in the morning when you woke up?
Tell me how your day went.
Exactly.
How were you feeling that day when you got there?
Absolutely. It can give you some context, right? It can open up some doors that you didn't know existed. Yeah. So start open. If you need to get detailed, do. Let the line of questioning kind of flow organically. If they're on a roll, let them roll.
Yeah, you don't have to talk.
Absolutely. Tell me more about that is an absolute gold mine of a question. And you can use it over and over and over again. Like, tell me more about that. That's interesting. That not only provides a little bit of verbal feedback that lets them know that what we're talking about is stuff I care about. I'm engaged. I'm interested.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What happened next?
Right? Absolutely.
A lot of good stuff like that. As you can see, we're scratching the surface, and we could clearly go on for another hour, 2 hours, or apparently 2 days. So thanks so much for watching this, and we look forward to seeing you in the field.
Thanks.